The US isn't bluffing anymore. It's sending a second aircraft carrier straight into the Red Sea, and this time it's personal. The message? To the Houthis, stop attacking commercial ships. To Iran, get serious about nukes or face the consequences. This move clearly doubles America's firepower in the region and signals one thing loud and clear. The US is done warning. It's ready to strike. So what exactly is being deployed? And why does this carrier matter so much? Let's break it down. According to Bloomberg, the USS Carl Vinson will make its way into the Middle East after completing some pre-scheduled exercises in the Indo-Pacific. Once there, it'll join another aircraft carrier, the USS Harry S. Truman, to double the US strike capability from the Red Sea. This isn't a replacement. The USS Harry S. Truman will remain in the Red Sea, as Secretary of Defense Hegseth has also ordered the prolonging of its deployment in the region. Secretary Hegseth continues to make clear that should Iran or its proxies threaten American personnel and interests in the region, the United States will take decisive action to defend our people, said Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell when announcing the carrier deployment. To complement the CENTCOM, or US Central Command, maritime posture, Hegseth also ordered the deployment of additional squadrons and other air assets that will further reinforce our defensive air support capabilities. The United States and its partners remain committed to regional security in the CENTCOM area of responsibility and are prepared to respond to any state or non-state actor seeking to broaden or escalate conflict in the region. This isn't a warning by the US. It's a direct showcase of the true force it can bring against both the Houthis and Iran. And it's a show of force designed to deliver real pain to an American enemy. A day before the Pentagon announced the carrier deployment, US President Donald Trump delivered a message to the Houthi rebels the US is currently combating via the Red Sea. He said that it was time for the Houthis to make a decision. The choice for the Houthis is clear. Stop shooting at US ships and we will stop shooting at you. Otherwise, we have only just begun, and the real pain is yet to come for both the Houthis and their sponsors in Iran. That message from Trump gives us some clues as to why the USS Carl Vinson is heading to the Middle East. But before we dig into those reasons further, we have a question to ask. Why does the USS Carl Vinson represent such a major threat to the Houthis and Iran? The USS Carl Vinson is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that entered service in 1982. It's one of 10 Nimitz-class carriers in the US arsenal. The USS Harry S. Truman, that the carrier will join in the Red Sea, is another. And it's an extremely powerful ship. It's powered by a pair of Westinghouse A4W nuclear reactors, along with 4 steam turbines that combine to feed 4 propeller shafts, capable of generating a staggering 260,000 horsepower. That pure power is enough to propel the USS Carl Vinson to speeds of over 30 knots, which is equivalent to around 34.5 miles per hour. And thanks to using nuclear power, the ship's range is effectively unlimited, meaning the US doesn't have to worry about making stopovers for refueling once the carrier is in the Red Sea. It's also an impressive ship structurally. The carrier measures 1,092 feet long, has a 252-foot beam, and is capable of carrying up to around 5,680 US Navy personnel. That sheer size means the ship displaces approximately 97,000 tons of water. For context, that's more than a third of the total 246,000-ton displacement of Iran's 107-vessel navy. In other words, the USS Carl Vinson is much bigger than any ship in Iran's navy, and certainly presents a massive threat to the small patrol vessels and speedboats the Houthis have been using to conduct their Red Sea assaults. The ship is also packed with weapons. Armaments on the USS Carl Vinson include a pair of Sea Sparrow Mark 57 Mod 3 surface-to-air missile launchers. Those launchers can fire the Sea Sparrow missile, which is a short-range weapon capable of homing in on a target and making flight corrections via a radar uplink. The missile offers the USS Carl Vinson defense against several low-flying aerial threats, along with threats on the water's surface. If the Houthis or Iran launch a cruise missile at the carrier, it's this anti-air system that will blow that missile out of the skies. Other weapons on board include a trio of 20mm Phalanx close-in weapon systems. These incredibly powerful and fast-firing guns can rattle off between 3,000 and 4,500 rounds to utterly shred any vessel that attempts to come into range of the carrier. Add to this a pair of RIM 116 rolling airframe missiles, which add to the Sea Sparrow's short-range surface-to-air capabilities, and you get a ship that's fully capable of defending itself against any incoming threats. But what about attacking power? That comes from the 90 or so aircraft the USS Carl Vinson brings along with it. Specifically, the carrier is home to embarked staff from Carrier Air Wing 2, or CVW-2, providing the ship with a powerful flying force. CVW-2 operates a host of aircraft, including the F-35C Lightning II, which is among the US's most modern and capable fighter jets. Other squadrons operate F-18 Hornets, MH-60RS Seahawks, EA-18G Growlers, and the E-2D Advanced. That combination of aircraft gives the USS Carl Vinson the ability to reconnoiter a huge region and, when a threat is identified, to bomb that into oblivion. And that brings us to another question. Why is the USS Carl Vinson heading to the Middle East? We've touched on the answer already. The US is using the ship to show Iran and the Houthis in Yemen that it's very serious about both. Starting with the Houthis, a thorn in the collective side of the US and its allies since late 2023. In response to Israel starting a war against Hamas in Gaza, which itself was a response to Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel in October 2023, the Houthis have been targeting commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The group's first hijacking took place in November 2023, and it has since launched dozens of drone and missile assaults against commercial vessels. Those attacks have sunk at least 2 ships and allowed the Houthis to seize 3 vessels. The group has also killed 4 crew members in that time, all in support of Hamas. The group's attacks slowed down in 2024, mostly because the US and UK created a force that entered the Red Sea to counter the Houthi threat. In early 2025, the group stopped its attacks completely when Hamas and Israel agreed to a temporary ceasefire. However, March 10th brought with it renewed Houthi threats to attack commercial vessels in the Red Sea when that truce broke down. Those threats brought the US back into the picture. On March 15th, the US began a bombing campaign in Yemen, which is the Houthis' home nation, and a country that the group has been slowly taking over since the 2011 Arab Spring. Right now, the Houthis control large portions of western Yemen, including the country's capital of Sana'a, and have been deeply involved in a civil war that has thus far killed 160,000 people. The US strikes ordered by Trump are adding to that death toll. By March 16th, the strikes had killed at least 53 people, along with injuring dozens more, with bombing raids being carried out daily. On March 16th alone, US warplanes launched 47 raids, targeting at least 7 Yemeni provinces, with each raid having the goal of destroying members of the Houthi leadership or, failing that, taking out key military infrastructure the group operates in Yemen. Up until now, those strikes have been launched from the USS Harry S. Truman. Now that the USS Carl Vinson is joining the fray, the strikes have the potential to become even more intense. So the obvious reason that the US is sending the USS Carl Vinson to the Middle East is to increase the pressure it's already placing on the Houthis. President Trump made that clear with his statements about delivering more pain to the group. His message is simple. If the Houthis stop attacking commercial ships, the US will stop bombing the group's territory in Yemen. However, the reality is much different from those statements. Yes, the US wants to clear up the Red Sea. The Houthis' attacks have disrupted a route that sees around 12% of global trade, worth around $1 trillion, pass through it every year. However, the real reason that the USS Carl Vinson is heading to the Middle East is that the US is directly threatening the country that keeps the Houthis going. The Houthis, along with groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, have long been seen as proxies for Iran. Trump has said multiple times that he holds Iran responsible for the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. He's also threatened dire consequences for the country if it continues its support of the group, with those consequences starting to materialize now that the USS Carl Vinson is heading to the Red Sea. And Trump has a point. According to the BBC, Iran enabled the Houthis to begin their Red Sea attacks by smuggling weapons, including drones and both ballistic and cruise missiles, into Yemen. Iran did this even though the Yemeni civil war led to the United Nations applying an arms embargo on the country. Dr. Elizabeth Kendall, who's a Middle East specialist at the UK's Cambridge University, says, "The Houthis could not operate at this level without Iranian arms, training, and intelligence." However, she also adds that it's unclear that Iran has direct command and control over the Houthis. The implication is that Iran is happy to fund and supply the group while leaving it free to act independently, because the Houthis' independent actions still feed into Iran's goal of causing chaos in the Middle East. Through that chaos, Iran can emerge as one of the region's key power brokers, without having to involve itself in direct attacks against its competitors such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. The deployment of the USS Carl Vinson is designed to apply pressure onto Iran. Though Trump is sending messages to stop the Red Sea attacks to the Houthis, the real message is being delivered to the group's supporters. The US is demonstrating that it's not only willing to respond to Iran's funding and support of the Houthis, but that it has the capability to do so. Each airstrike that originates from the aircraft carrier from here on out is a warning to Iran. This is happening to the Houthis right now. We could just as easily turn the focus of our carriers onto you. However, there's another element at play here. Beyond convincing Iran to cut off its support to the Houthis, which directly impacts the situation in the Red Sea, Trump is also using the USS Carl Vinson to reinforce the threats he's making over Iran's nuclear program. In mid-March, Trump sent a letter to Iran telling the country that it was time to come to the table to negotiate a new nuclear arms deal. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, There is currently no public information suggesting that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. But there wouldn't be. Iran has always been secretive about its nuclear ambitions. However, the bulletin also points out that the recent weakening of Iran's conventional deterrence against Israel's attacks on its territory, as well as on its allies Hamas and Hezbollah, may motivate Tehran to pursue a nuclear deterrent. The bulletin also notes that Iran is currently a nuclear threshold state. It doesn't have nukes right now. However, it would be likely able to build them fairly quickly, and in secret, if it decided it needed to have access to these terrible weapons. Trump's letter to Iran was his attempt to gain control over that situation. He wants to negotiate so that the US can prevent Iran from representing a threat to the power balance in the Middle East. The problem? Iran flat out refused to open direct negotiations with Trump or any of his US envoys. Therein lies the second reason why the USS Carl Vinson is heading to the Middle East. Trump even made his reasoning clear when responding to Iran's refusal to discuss its nuclear program. On March 30th, he said that if Iran doesn't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. Iran's immediate response to those threats was to point out that Trump's actions violate several charters and regimes. The country's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei responded, "The explicit threat of bombing Iran by the head of a country is a clear contradiction to the essence of international peace and security. Such a threat is a gross violation of the United Nations Charter and a violation of the International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards regime. Violence brings violence and peace creates peace. America can choose. The US won't see it that way." It believes that Iran's funding of the Houthis in the Red Sea is the violence about which Iran speaks, and while it's true that this violence has brought an overwhelming response, the US will contend that Iran started it all. If there were no Red Sea attacks, and if Iran would just come to the table on a nuclear deal, then there would be no need for the USS Carl Vinson to be heading to the Middle East. As it stands, the Houthis still want to continue their assaults, and Iran won't talk about its nuclear program. So the US has to increase the pressure. The relocation of the USS Carl Vinson is the mechanism the US is using to exert that pressure. And it's not the only mechanism at play. Beyond the USS Harry S. Truman, which is already operating in the Red Sea, the Washington Examiner points out that the US also has the option of diverting a third aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, to the region. That carrier is currently operating in the Pacific Ocean and would only take about 3 to 4 weeks to arrive in the Red Sea if Hegseth gave the order. Add to all of this the B-2 Spirit bomber buildup at a remote military base named Diego Garcia. The base, which is owned by the UK and leased to the US, has seen the arrival of at least 7 US B-2s, which have the range and weaponry needed to reach Iran and launch bombing campaigns against the country from the base. Again, it's all pressure. The US is using the arrival of a second aircraft carrier in the Middle East to reinforce Trump's threats. It may not be bombing Iran right now. The US is focusing on the Houthis, but as soon as the US feels the job is done in Yemen, it will force Iran to deal with the fact that there are 2 aircraft carriers, potentially home to 180 of America's bombers and fighter jets, along with a remote base that all have their sights on the country. That leaves us with just one question. What happens if Iran doesn't comply and Trump feels like there's no option but to follow through on his threats to bomb the country? We're already seeing how the US can use its aircraft carriers in its bombing campaign against the Houthis. Not a lot would change if it decided to switch its attention to Iran. The US ships currently stationed in the Red Sea could stay there and continue to send aircraft, this time in Iran's direction, to continue their bombing campaign. That would require permission from Saudi Arabia to use its airspace, allowing US fighters to cross the country so they can reach the Persian Gulf and enter Iranian territory. That permission may not be hard to come by. Saudi Arabia has been the victim of Houthi attacks before, including a large-scale attack conducted in March 2022 that combined ballistic and cruise missiles alongside loitering munitions. Given that the Houthis are an Iranian proxy, Saudi Arabia sees the attack, and others like it along its border with Yemen, as coming from Iran. The odds are that the US will have no trouble using Saudi airspace for its aircraft carrier strike. Failing that, the US also has the option of sailing through the Gulf of Oman and into the Arabian Sea, from where it could enter the Persian Gulf. That would allow the US to send its aircraft into Iran via its carriers without having to worry about violating another country's airspace. The issue here is that moving the carriers to these locations would also mean placing them closer to Iran, and that means Iran could respond with missile strikes of its own. Those strikes, according to the national interest, could be powerful enough to sink the USS Carl Vinson if it comes into range. The outlet points out that Iranian state media lauded the development of the Talaya long-range cruise missile toward the end of 2023. That missile has a range of 600 miles and can supposedly switch targets in mid-flight. If the US stationed an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, that carrier would be in range of some of those missiles. It might also have to face assaults from Iran's shorter-range Nasir missiles, which the country can launch from its warships, along with drone and rocket assaults launched from the Iranian mainland. There's also the Noor missile to consider. Reverse-engineered from China's C-801 anti-ship missile, the Noor is difficult to jam, has a range of 136 miles, and can travel at speeds of up to Mach 1.4 that make it difficult to shoot out of the skies. The point here is that the US needs to be careful. The arrival of the USS Carl Vinson in the Middle East doubles its aircraft carrier power projection and delivers a definitive threat to both the Houthis and Iran. The Houthis can't challenge those ships. The cruise missiles and drones can be destroyed by the USS Carl Vinson's air defenses, but Iran, that represents a much more dangerous target and one that could potentially destroy an aircraft carrier in the right circumstances. But for now, the US is using the USS Carl Vinson to apply pressure to both stop the Houthi attacks and bring Iran to the negotiating table. Will that pressure work? Or are we watching as the situation in the Middle East escalates into a full-blown war? Let us know what you think the answers to those questions might be in the comments, as well as telling us how you think the US will use the USS Carl Vinson in the coming months. And remember to subscribe to the Military Show for commentary on everything that's happening in the Middle East right now.